When George Rogers Clark and his gang of merry Army guys made it to the Falls of the Ohio in 1778, they decided that this was the western front of the Revolutionary War. And George Rogers Clark liked the area. He liked the falls, and he liked Corn Island, and he decided to stay. And he decided to start a city, and he called the city Louisville. And his first goal was to make the entire waterfront a public space, a commons, a green space. The only problem was the city was in debt pretty much right when it started in 1780, so they had to sell all that land. So the highest bidders won the land, and so Louisville lost its green space on the river. As you can see, Indiana had no problem with green space on the river, but Louisville just went to industry. And so the industry was a lot of, obviously the Ohio River was a big driver of that industry. And Indiana still has a lot of really good green space, and they also have the best Mexican food in Louisville until Chewy showed up, actually. And then in the 1840s, right around here, that's actually Harrods Creek going under there, the old way, is where Lincoln saw slavery for the first time in action, really saw it. And it's what brought him to being so appalled by it. And it's why the statue of Lincoln is in Waterfront Park right now, because that's what happened right there. And this is the Big Four Bridge. It was built in the late 1800s, and this was an incredibly dangerous bridge, but you'll notice that they have someone walking across it, so that's an interesting idea. They have two different gauges of railroad, and it was so dangerous that they decided they better rebuild a new one, but they didn't want to lose the old one, so they built the new one inside of it. And so they built this one inside the old one, and then when this one was up in the late 20s, they tore down the other one. And so this bridge played an important part in Louisville's commerce, in Indiana and Kentucky's commerce, until the 1850s, and then it was done. And it was just this ghost bridge. So now this is what the waterfront was like pretty much when I was born. You'll notice there's a lot of construction, compaction of old cars, and way in the far right are old train cars that literally giant scissors cut in half. And so Louisville had a really great way of saying hello to anyone coming into town. It was basically, hi, here's our industry, and it's the ugliest industry we can possibly show you. And this is the dredging that went on. And if you notice that building on the far right, keep that in mind. So what happened was, finally, Louisville woke up in the 60s and 70s and 80s in fits and starts, and then decided, you know what, we need to do something about this waterfront. We need to do something that's going to be economic, and it's going to be good looking. As you can see, they hadn't gotten there yet. Just a note, Belknap Hardware was the largest hardware dealer in the planet, and it was right there. So what they did was they decided to form something called the Waterfront Development Corporation. And the Binghams gave the Waterfront Development Corporation a building, that building, and they're still there now today. And so they decided to have all these public hearings. What does Louisville want? And Louisville said, we want a green space. They didn't know that George Rogers Clark tried that 200 years prior, but that's what we wanted, and we always wanted it, and we still want it. So they started it. They raised a lot of money, and they got a designer named George Hargraves, and the process started. They had 3 phases. Phase 1 was near downtown Louisville. Phase 3 was out towards, Phase 2 was out towards the east, and Phase 3 was right in the middle, and I'll get to that in a second. So this is them clearing out the land and trying to make it somewhat clean. And basically, they had a situation where we had to build a flood wall. And so this is the Great Lawn coming out down over the river. They couldn't impede the flow of the river, so they built the last 28 feet of the Great Lawn over the river on pylons, so they didn't impede the flow. But what they did was they basically made the park the flood wall. And so, and this is a lot of the drainage system for the flood wall. So basically up at Witherspoon, it's 451 feet, which is 1 foot above the 100-year flood line. And so the whole Great Lawn started way behind, south of I-64, which you'll see coming up here. And it slopes all the way down to the river. And that was the design, that was the thing that got George Hargraves the job. Because he included I-64, because it was something there, it's not going to move. You know, some of us wanted to, but it's not going to move. And so the whole Great Lawn is the flood wall, which is something that no one had really thought about before. And they actually lowered the ground underneath the freeway. And the other thing that George Hargraves does is he changes the land. He calls it unnatural nature. So there's not one thing in that park that was actually the way it was, or obviously nothing was very much the way it was anyway, but he changes everything. He grades everything. He designs every hill, every berm, and it was also the berms that got him the job, these guys. And so this is a view down from the Big Four Bridge, and you can see that he sculpts everything. Every tree is planted in a specific way. The groundskeepers have to keep those lines. They're going to try to keep those lines, you know, for forever. And now we get to phase 3. And so what David Karam did, this is the Big Four Bridge. This is right when the project started. You can see the stand down there. He left phase 3 in the middle so that it had to get done. And he knew the Big Four Bridge was the most important thing, so he left a hole. And so what happens is, so they're going to build a ramp up to the top level there, and they were going to put it on land. They were going to build a giant dome. But they realized that the land underneath that proposed dome was going to be too weak. So they had to take out that idea and they had to build it on these stands. So this ramp's about a quarter of a mile long, just walking up to the bridge. And it's a fascinating walk. And here they are taking the railroad ties down from the Big Four Bridge version 2. And that's 22 feet across, all the way to Indiana. And next week they're going to be putting the preformed slabs of concrete down, starting in Indiana, moving this way. So George and I are shooting it. We're going to get a good shot. And so this is the view from the bridge. This is what you guys all have to look forward to. This is what we've got. This is what the gift of David Jones and Mary Bingham and Sally Brown and David Karam and a lot of people to the city of Louisville. This is it. And George Rogers Clark, I think, would be pretty happy, although it only took 200 years.